word for today is 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved for judgment. This verse reminds us of the sure nature of God's judgment to come. In fact, if you remember the context, when we looked at this last time, Peter says, "But there were also false prophets among the people, as even there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber." It is in this context that Peter reminds us of the sure nature of God's judgment, that even though judgment hasn't immediately happened on the false teachers and doesn't immediately come upon sin, it does not mean that it will not come. So then he gives us a couple of examples of God's judgment. First, he uses the judgment of angels. He says in verse 4, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned." Let's look now at the words of the text. To begin with, he has the word "for." We've seen this before. It's the Greek word gar, which takes us back to the previous text. Verse 4 is explaining exactly why verses 1 through 3 are true, that God will judge because he has judged the angels who sinned. Then he says the word "if." The word "if" should not be understood that God might judge. The word "if" is a first-class conditional sentence and should be understood as since. So you could read this, "For since God did not spare the angels who sinned." The word "spare" here is the Greek word "phydomai." And the word "phydomai" has the idea of abstaining from or forbearing. One lexicon used the word in the sense of leniency. So it's telling us that God was not and will not be lenient against the angels who sinned. He did not spare them or abstain from judging them for their sin. So it tells us that these angels sinned. The word "sinned" here is the Greek word hamartios. It's the same word that is translated "sinned" in Romans chapter 3 and verse 23, where it says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." It is the idea of missing the mark, but it is also the idea of disobeying the standard or the law of God. So these angels disobeyed God. And as a result, the Bible tells us that God cast them down to hell. Now, this word translated "cast them down to hell" is actually one word. The word "them" is not in the text. It's used there to help us understand it more clearly. But the word "cast down to hell" is a verb, tartaros. And the word tartaros is a word that is used only one time here in the New Testament, and it refers to a place in hell. But to understand more about this place called hell, we need to understand that there are a few words used to refer to this place in the New Testament. The first is the word Gehenna. And the word Gehenna actually does refer to a place, a real place that was outside of Jerusalem. It was the local dump where all the trash would be placed, or the dead carcasses of animals would be placed. Sometimes even criminals, their bodies would be placed there after they were executed. And so this place also had a fire that burned continually, and the smoke would go up from Gehenna on a constant basis. So Jesus used that as a very clear example of what hell is really like. It is the place where the fire is never quenched, and the worm dieth not. Then you have another word used in the New Testament that is the word for pit. In fact, on one occasion, you remember Jesus was going to cast out some demons, and the demons asked that they would not be cast into the pit. This is the Greek word abyssos, or abyss. It's referred to also in Revelation chapter 9 when it talks about the demons that come out of hell, or the bottomless pit. This is the pit of hell, the dark, deep, bottomless pit. The other word that is used is the word Hades. Hades is used in Luke chapter 16 when it refers to the rich man and Lazarus, where the rich man dies and he ends up in a place of torments. And then Lazarus dies and is carried off into Abraham's bosom, a place of paradise. This place is called Hades, or as some have referred to it as the abode of the dead, or the invisible realm of spirits. There is also a word that is equivalent to that in the Old Testament. It is the word Sheol, which sometimes refers to the grave, but also can refer to the place or the abode of the spirits. So you have Gehenna and Pit and Hades and Sheol, but you have this word here that is used in this text and this text alone. It is the word Tartaros. And the word actually refers to the lower regions of hell, the bottom of the bottom, the darkest of the dark. The verb that is translated here came also from Greek mythology that identified a subterranean abyss, lower than hell itself. It was the abode of the most wicked spirits. The worst of rebels and criminals would receive the severest divine punishment in this area. So these angels were delivered to a place in hell that is the deepest, darkest pit of hell. It's worse than Gehenna. It's worse than the pit. And it's worse than Hades itself. It's the deepest and the darkest of all hell. But he also tells us in the text that God delivered them. This is the word paradidomi. We find that often used over in Romans chapter 1, where God delivered them over to their own vile passions as a result of judgment. It is a judicial term that has the idea of God's judgment of delivering them over to the authorities to be punished. We find it also used in Acts chapter 8 and verse 3, where it says, "As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison." Acts chapter 12 verse 4 says, "So when they arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him." So this word has the idea of being delivered over to imprisonment or being delivered over to judgment. And more particularly in this text, it is noted that these angels were cast down to this place called Tartarus, or hell, the pit, the bottom pit of hell. And they are delivered and kept there in chains, it says, of darkness. Now, some manuscripts actually use the word pits of darkness here for this word here, chains. Some of the earlier manuscripts, some of the later manuscripts that you find that now we have the translation for the King James and the New King James use the word chains. The idea is complete, total confinement, inability to escape. They are bound there in the deepest, darkest pit of hell, reserved there as indicated in this text. And this word reserved is a word that comes from the root word tereo. And the word tereo means to be guarded or observed or watched over. It properly has the idea of preserving someone, maintaining someone. And it is also a present tense verb. In fact, it is a present participle, which tells us that God is the one who is continually keeping them, guarding them, maintaining them for future judgment. This is the most amazing thing. These angels who sinned have been cast down to this place called Tartarus, and they are delivered there and completely bound there in darkness and being kept by God, reserved for future judgment. It is as if they are in jail awaiting their final sentencing to be cast into the lake of fire, but the place they are in right now is one of the worst jails they could be in. But we have to ask a couple of questions about this text to understand more what's going on here, because there seems to be some mystery here. The 3 questions we have to ask to determine the severity of the judgment on these angels is this: who are these angels? And 2, what did they do to receive such a severe punishment? And 3, do we know when this happened? Let's look at each of these questions to understand what Peter is saying. First of all, who are these angels? Well, if we look at the text we studied, it says, "For if God did not spare the angels." Now, the word "the" is not in the original text there. It's actually what they call an unauthorized construction without the definite article. And so the idea is that God did not spare angels who sinned. When you turn to Jude, it says, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode." here the word has the definite article the. It's referring to the same situation or the same event. But I think it's important to understand why one has the word the and the other does not. First of all, in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4, what Peter is doing is this. He is actually showing the shock that even angels themselves, the highest ranking beings that God has created, were not spared from judgment. Even the supreme angels of heaven were not spared judgment. So, as one Greek grammarian said, that even though it does not have the actual definite article the there, it is emphatic the way it is constructed. It is telling us that even angels who sin have been judged. Now, when we turn to Jude 6, we find the definite article there because now the author Jude is making a distinction. He is saying that there is a distinct group that actually left heaven. There seems to be in the mind of the author here to indicate that there's one group of angels who sinned distinctly from other angels. Remember, there are angels who fell in the first fall when Satan fell and angels went with him. The book of Revelation tells us that a third of the angels left heaven with him, which would be an innumerable host of angels. They are the demons that roam the earth at this time along with Satan. But here in this text, he tells us that there are the angels, not the same angels that left with Satan, but there's a unique and distinct group of angels who did not keep their proper domain and left their own abode. So these angels are a unique group of angels that have left heaven and have sinned in a certain way, unique and different than the way the ones did with Satan. Now, to understand a little bit more about this, you need to know that there are three views about the identity of these angels. Some say that we don't even know who they are, that there's no real way to know who these angels are or anything more about them than what Peter or Jude says. The second view is that these angels are the ones who fell with Satan at the original fall. I don't believe that is the case because of the unique use of the word the here in this case and the way it is defined here, how they left their proper domain and their own abode. And as we'll see later, they had a particular sin that they were involved in. And then also, third, there's the view that says that there's another set of angels that fell during the days of Noah. What exactly is that referring to? Well, let's look a little further. First of all, to understand that, we need to answer the second question. What did they do to receive such punishment? 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 18 says that Christ, when he was made alive by the Spirit, went, it says, and preached to the spirits who were in prison. Now the word preached here is the Greek word keruso. It means to herald a victory. It is not the Greek word euangelizo, which means to preach the gospel. This is not teaching us that Jesus went down to hell and preached the gospel to people and gave them a second chance. In fact, what it is telling us is that Jesus went down to this place and he preached to the spirits who are in prison. And the word preached is keruso, that is, he heralded a victory to the spirits who are in prison. And the word spirits here is usually referred to angelic host, not to souls of men. The word suke for soul is used to refer to the souls of men. But here, as is often the case in the New Testament, the word spirits refers to angels. So these are the ones who are confined in prison, chains of darkness, as it says in Peter and also in Jude. And these are the ones who did what? They were formally disobedient. They disobeyed God. They disobeyed his law. We find more information about this in Jude 6 and 7, where it says the angels who did not keep their proper domain. This is the Greek word arche. And arche actually is a word that means to begin or the beginning. It is used over in John 1:1 when it says, in the beginning was the Word. And the word arche is used there for the word beginning. But it also has the idea of origin or place of origination. And so what it is telling us is that these angels did not keep their proper place of origination, where they were created and what they were created for. They did not stay there. And then it goes on and says, and they left. The word left means deserted their own abode, their own unique abode. This Greek word is the translation of oiketerion. And the word oiketerion has one word in it that may be familiar to you. It's the word oikos, which is the word house. The word oiketerion has the idea of habitation or dwelling place. And what is unique about this, it's not talking about a geographical location. Rather, it's talking about a place of habitation where you dwell in a particular mode. It more importantly has the idea of actually what sphere you dwell in, spiritual versus physical. And the reason why I say that is because this same word is used only one other time in the New Testament, and it's used in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 2, where the Apostle Paul says, "For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling." And the tent refers to the body that we have now, the sinful body that we live in now. But we groan and look forward to and long for putting on our new dwelling place, which is our glorified body. It is a unique body like our Lord's body after the resurrection that can dwell in the physical and the spiritual realm. So what it's telling us is that these angels disobeyed God, as indicated in 1 Peter 3 and verse 20, but they did not keep their proper domain. They left their place of origin, which would have been clearly heaven, and where they were supposed to stay. And they also deserted, abandoned their own abode, which would be their own sphere where they dwelled and lived, which would be the spiritual realm. And I believe the idea is that they left the spiritual realm for the physical realm. Because if you look a little further in the text, it tells us what they did. Not only did they leave heaven, and not only did they abandon their own spiritual abode for a different abode, but it says that they, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in similar manner to these, it says, they gave themselves over to sexual immorality and went after strange flesh. So it's telling us that these angels left heaven, came down to this earth, took on physical form, and had sexual relationships with strange flesh. What exactly are they talking about? Well, I believe if we ask the third question, we'll find this out. So the third question is, do we know when this happened? Well, let's look again. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18 says, "For Christ, when he was made alive by the Spirit, he went and preached to the spirits in prison who were disobedient." Listen to this. "When once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah when the ark was being prepared." When were these angels disobedient? When were these spirits disobedient? It says when Noah was building the ark. That's when they were disobedient. And what exactly is that referring to? Well, in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 1 and following, I believe we have a reference there to this event. It says, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them." Nothing wrong with that. Men were multiplying as God had commanded them to do, and daughters were born to them. But then it says in verse 2, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose." Now, there's no doubt that this passage has been debated a number of times as to who the identity is of these sons of God. But I think it's important to understand that the Hebrew phrase, B'nai Ha-Elohim, that is used to translate sons of God, always refers to angels in other Old Testament texts. In Job 1:6, in Job 2:1, in Job 38:7, in Psalm 29:1, and in Psalm 89:6. It always refers to angelic host from heaven. not to sons of men. It would have said sons of men saw the daughters of men, but this case it says the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives. It's also important to note that there was not fornication here. They took wives. They actually married them. It even says later on in the text, in verse 4, that there were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward. Listen to this. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Now, this may sound a little bizarre, that you would actually have angels that would come down from heaven, leave their own original place, and leave their own proper abode, and come into the physical realm and marry women and produce children, and then God would punish them as a result of that. What we need to understand is that it is actually common for angels to come down and take on human form. On a number of occasions, we had Abraham that was visited by the angels who took on human form. If you remember, whenever Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels came to him, and they were also in human form. And the Bible even tells us that the men of Sodom desired to have the angels because they were so clearly physical, so clearly of human origin, it seemed, that they desired to have them. And also another verse to always keep in mind is Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2 that says, "Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels." So these angels came down from heaven, took on human form, cohabitated with women, and produced children. And as a result of that, the Bible says in verse 5 of Genesis 6, "Then the Lord saw the wickedness of men was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. And the Lord was so sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them." And we add now to this text what Peter and Jude refer to, that there were angels who came down, and having fallen from heaven, they become demons, and they inhabit humanity, and they sin against man and God judges them. Arthur Pink wrote regarding the justice and the judgment of God, "Never was there a greater need for the ministers of the gospel to proclaim the inflexible justice of God than in the evil days in which our lot has fallen. Not only is God himself insulted and grossly dishonored by the perversions of his character which have been so widely promulgated during this last few decades, but multitudes of people have been fatally deceived thereby, until a generation has now arisen to whom the deity of Holy Writ is the unknown God. All around us are those who have so erroneous an idea of the divine clemency that they suppose God is as easygoing as the modern parent, or as lax as many of our judges. They suppose that only in the most extreme and exceptional cases, if indeed then, will he punish the crimes of any with everlasting fire. By such ungrounded assumptions do they stifle any occasional convictions of conscience, and steel their hearts against the apprehensions of danger which may visit them, persuading themselves that God is so full of mercy that his justice is virtually inoperative." Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, "When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, the hearts of the people are filled with schemes to do wrong. Though the warrant is signed, yet the execution thereof may be suspended for just reasons. Sin is not the less odious to God because he does not immediately inflict its punishment. He delays to display his infinite patience. He bears with much patience the vessels of wrath. Some, like Manasseh and Saul of Tarsus, are spared that they may become the monuments of his sovereign grace." And that is the word for today.